Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to day one of Dilli series Sea Power webinar on the role of sea power in shaping nations. India is rising as a maritime superpower. As its torchbearers, we need to have incisive knowledge about our regional allies, with whom we have to work in the future, not just for prosperity, but also for safeguarding the region and its integrity. The theme for the second session is Sea Power, Blue Economy, Cooperation and Contestation for Resources. This very relevant session includes papers presented by our midshipmen, along with eminent figures in the field. This session includes a paper presentation by Dr. Sanjeev Sanyal, INA Syndicate, and Vice Admiral M.S. Pawar, Param Vishishta Seva Medal, Ati Vishishta Seva Medal, Vishishta Seva Medal, retired. As followed during all sessions, the cadets and midshipmen will have the opportunity to pose questions to our distinguished speakers at the end of the session. We are also truly blessed to have amidst us an admiral with such high distinction as the chairperson of the upcoming session, Vice Admiral Girish Luthra, Param Vishishta Seva Medal, Ati Vishishta Seva Medal, Vishishta Seva Medal, retired. Vice Admiral Girish Luthra, a distinguished alumnus of the National Defence Academy Khadakwasla, served the Indian Navy for nearly 4 decades with exemplary achievements and leadership. His illustrious career spanned a wide array of roles, from commanding frontline warships and the Western Fleet to holding key staff appointments, including Deputy Chief of Operations. Notably, he superannuated as Commander-in-Chief of the Western Naval Command. Recognized for his strategic acumen, he played a pivotal role in shaping India's maritime capabilities, space and cyber strategies, and disaster management efforts. An accomplished scholar and speaker, he has received numerous awards, including the Param Vishishta Seva Medal, and continues to contribute actively as strategic advisor and distinguished fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. It is indeed an honor for us to have you here, sir. May I request you to initiate the proceedings of this session?
Thank you, Cadet Harsh Pandey, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to session 2. Having heard different speakers in the first sessions, which covered theoretical underpinnings and historical background of sea power, it is appropriate that we transition to the second session, which is titled Sea Power, Blue Economy, Cooperation and Contestation for Resources. It is apt to transition to this session simply because, as you've heard in the previous session as well, that there is a strong link between sea power and geopolitics, as also between sea power and geoeconomics. And to a large extent, sea power derived its relevance and importance in the past from economic considerations. This relevance is even more pronounced today because we are witnessing a new paradigm of intersectionality of geopolitics and geoeconomics, which have a very strong maritime bias today. And in this very uncertain and unpredictable regional and global order, we are witnessing an all domain competition that is taking place around us. And this competition extends to various domains, including trade, commerce, connectivity, supply chains, technology, and what is being referred to as weaponization of everything. Also, we are seeing that access to key resources and to key materials, and not just access, but ability to process them has become an important consideration for national power today. Blue economy is another theme which has gained traction and momentum in the recent years. And as most of you would know, blue economy encompasses ocean, sea, and coastal economies and has many subsets to this. It has tremendous potential. As you know, India has in 2021 a draft blue economy policy was circulated by the government, and in the near future, in the next few days or months, we should be expecting the final document of India's blue economy to be promulgated. Many other countries have promulgated their national policies on blue economy as it offers tremendous potential. But in addition to opportunities that are being thrown up by blue economy, it also comes with numerous challenges. Some of these, as you know, relate to governance, cooperation, competition, climate, biodiversity, and habitat conservation. To discuss these important issues, we have three speakers. Of course, these talks will be covered with specific relevance to India. And the first part that is going to be covered by Dr. Sanjeev Sanyal will be on components of blue economy and its potential for India. Dr. Sanjeev Sanyal is currently a member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister. He was principal economic advisor to the Finance Minister for 5 years till February 2022 and was the co-chair of G20's Framework Working Group. Prior to working with the government, he spent over 2 decades in financial markets and was global strategist and managing director at Deutsche Bank, an alumni of Sri Ram College of Commerce, Delhi. Mr. Sanyal later attended Oxford University as a Rhodes Scholar. He was awarded the Eisenhower Fellowship in 2007 for his work on urban dynamics. In 2010, he was named as a young global leader by the World Economic Forum in Davos. Mr. Sanyal is the author of a number of best-selling books, including Land of the Sea of the Seven Rivers, The Ocean of Churn, India in the Age of Gas, and the Indian Renaissance. He has also published over 200 articles and columns in leading national and international publications. So we are fortunate to have Dr. Sanjeev Sanyal with us to speak to us on this important topic. Over to you, Dr. Sanyal.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be speaking to all of you. The topic I'm going to speak about is sea power, blue economy, and cooperation. Now, it's a big topic, and if I merely speak about it thematically, it's going to be quite dry. So I'm going to intersperse it with a lot of historical examples to give you some feel of this. Now, as you are all aware, India has a very rich maritime past, which goes back to the Bronze Age of the Harappans, through the Iron Age, through the trade with the Romans and Greeks, and with the great empires of the East, like the Majapahit in Indonesia, and so on. And it's a very fascinating history as well, in which India played a major role. So, oddly enough, modern India has been quite oddly a almost sea-blind country till recently, when we began to open ourselves up again. But for a variety of reasons, not the least that perhaps that our capital happens to be far inland in Delhi, our attitude towards the ocean has not been as embracing as would be the case for a country that actually has an ocean named after it. In fact, India is the only country in the world which actually has a ocean named after it, the Indian Ocean. And we have, as I mentioned, a history that is very closely linked to the ocean. And yet, much of the way in which we think has not been oriented to the seas, which is sad because once you begin to orient yourself to the seas, uh, our history, our geopolitics, our economics begins to all look very different. So if you take a landlocked view of the world, then our neighbors are Pakistan and China, which have both been quite hostile to us in the past. But if you take a maritime view of the world, our neighbors are quite different. They are the UAE and Oman and Indonesia and Singapore and even Australia, which is an Indian Ocean country. People forget that. And so then the world begins looking quite different and a much more friendly, welcoming place. These are all countries with whom we have historically had good links, with whom we have very close cultural links. After all, Singapore is named Singhapura. I mean, that's where the name comes from. It's a Sanskrit name. It means lion city. Indonesia is a country that has named itself after India. Just think, its currency is the rupiah. Its national symbol is Vishnu's Garuda. So the point I'm making is that a maritime view can be quite different from a landlocked view. And till recently, we had not embraced this. But it also has a long history which can illustrate many interesting insights into how to think about today. So let me give you a few illustrations about this. So if you went back 1,000 years back, so almost exactly 1,000 years ago, the world economy basically was built on trade, and almost all of it maritime trade between the Fatimid Empire, which ruled over Egypt and the areas around it, based based in, of course, Cairo. Then going through the Red Sea into the Indian Ocean to the Chola Empire, which was at its height and at that time controlled much of southern India, but also Sri Lanka, the Maldives, and so on. And then you went further eastward to the sea lanes that went one through the Malacca Straits and the other through the Sunda Straits. And I don't have to explain where they are since I'm dealing with people from the Navy. But these were controlled by two different groups. The Javanese empires and kingdoms usually controlled the Sunda Straits, and the Sumatrans, the Srivijaya kingdom, usually controlled the Malacca Straits. And then sea lanes went even further east to the Champa and the Hindu kingdoms of what is now Cambodia, and then further on to China, where the Song Empire was at its height. So, as you can see, the trade routes across the world basically started in the Mediterranean with the Fatimids, went through to the Cholas, went east through either the Sunda or the Malacca Straits, and then further out to the Song Empire. Now, let me show what happened, because remember, geopolitics is not a modern thing. So, somewhere in the early 11th century, what happens is that the Javans begin to fight against the Sumatrans, Srivijayas, and they begin to push them back. So, the Sumatrans, Srivijaya Empire, decided to ask the Chinese for help. So they asked the Song Empire for some help. And what happened is that the Song Empire provided them a lot of support. So with the help of the Chinese support, the Srivijaya were able to push back the Javanese and actually take control of the Sunda Straits. Now, what they did is that suddenly the passage through Southeast Asia, there used to be two alternatives, came to be controlled by the Srivijayans. And they began to use this control, interestingly, to extort high customs tariffs on all the ships that were going through these straits. Now, this, as you can imagine, was not taken lightly by the Cholas. And at this time, there was a great king called Rajendra Chola who ruled over southern India. And he sent a warning in the year 1017 to the Sumatrans that the way they were behaving was not quite right, and that they were interfering with trade with China. But it didn't seem to help, and the Sumatrans continued to behave badly. In fact, we have evidence that they gave the impression to the Chinese that the Cholas were actually the feudatories, which was actually not the case. And this information must have dribbled back to Rajendra Chola, who was not happy about this. So in the year 1025, Rajendra Chola created a large naval fleet, and it set off from Nagapattinam. It went down to Trincomalee, and then from there it swung eastward along with the uh, equatorial currents and landed up on the west coast of Sumatra. Now, it's not very clear exactly what they did, but the likeliest thing they probably did was, instead of going into the Malacca Straits, they actually went south along the west coast of Sumatra, and they joined up perhaps with the Javans, who were anyway smarting from the defeats. And then, having replenished their water and other supplies, they then went through the Sunda Straits onto the other side. And then what they did is they fought their way up the Malacca Straits. So they sacked Palembang, which was the main port and capital of the Srivijaya. They sacked several ports, both on the Sumatran side and on the Malay Peninsula. And then, in a great battle in the north of what is now Malaysia, they fought and defeated the main army of the Srivijaya. And then, having done that, they swung back, refueled, and picked up water and other supplies in the Nicobar Islands, and then made their way back. Now, this was a very successful raid, and not surprisingly, the shock of this raid caused the Srivijaya to finally bend to what the Cholas were asking them, and the sea lanes were opened up and trade continued. Now, what is interesting here is that in all of this, the Chinese did not back the Srivijaya at all. There is no record of this. Instead, a few years later, we find that the Srivijaya and the Cholas did a joint representation and embassy to the Chinese. Now, this is an interesting story for multiple levels. First of all, notice that geopolitics is not a new thing. It has been going on for hundreds of years, thousands of years, in fact. And that India and China have been competing with each other in multiple ways in Southeast Asia for a very long time. Now, this does not mean that, that it's kind of a case of continuous rivalry and antagonism. As you saw in this case, when the Indians, stood up for their trading rights and keeping the waters clear, the Chinese actually did not interfere. It's quite likely that the Song were just as irritated with the Srivijaya for trying to extort high taxes, and they were probably pleased that the Cholas cleared out the sea lanes. So who knows? We don't have the details, but I'm just pointing out to you that these kinds of rivalries happened in the past, and very often interests, economic interests, can be at different points in time quite different, and you may find that people you may think are your rivals may actually be quite willing to support your cause, or even at least turn a blind eye if interests coincide. So, therefore, first thing, which goes back to something that is said often in diplomacy, there are no permanent enemies or permanent friends. There are only permanent interests. And the reason I'm saying this is that we have historically had a very rigid view of how to think about foreign policy, who should our allies be, and so on. And in the last 5-6 years, however, we have taken a much more fluid view of how the world works. We are much clearer about our own interests and not so fussy about how, which side, which block, or how rigidly we should take historical positions. We have been quite fluid. For example, we have become over time much, much more close to the United States, with Israel, and so on. And at the same time, we have managed to improve our relations with Saudi Arabia and the UAE and so on, even through the period where we were under tremendous pressure to, push against our traditional ally Russia during the recent Ukraine crisis. You saw that we stood our ground, and in the end, everybody has accepted it because they understand where we come from. We are clear about our interests, but at the same time, we are willing to cooperate with other countries about for their interests. So rather than have these antagonistic, rigid views, we have learned how to collaborate with other countries, to understand where their interests lie and to help them in those interests, and to be able to work with them uh, to further their cause. So, just as you may be aware, we have this new thing that the G20 has announced, wherein we are going to create this C plus rail link, which extends from Western India through the Arabian Peninsula off to Israel, and then linking through to Greece and then to Europe as a whole, as a new route for um, trade and commerce between India and the Middle East going through to Europe. Now, this would have been unthinkable till a few years ago, because it would have, first of all, our own links and relationships with many countries in the Middle East were unnecessarily clouded by things like religious um, biases and so on. And then we would have not been able to hammer through something between, say, for example, something that goes through Saudi Arabia, but ends up, guess where, in Israel and Haifa, of all places, and then feeds through to Greece, and then to the rest of Europe. So this kind of thinking, which is flexible, but at the same time helps the interests of all countries. Because remember, what is the biggest worry for the countries on the Arabian Peninsula? Well, their biggest concern, as you can imagine, is what will happen to them after oil disappears. Today, they are all oil-driven economies, and they can see that as the world is moving away from oil into renewables, nuclear and solar and other kinds of energy, that it is foreseeable in the not too distant future that um, oil and gas on which the economies of the Middle East today function will become obsolete. And they need other ways of keeping their countries going, keeping their futures going. And they understand that India is an important part of this. In fact, it has always been a part of this because, as I mentioned, world trade has always gone through Arabia and the Middle East. And India was one leg of it, Europe on the other side was the other leg of it. So, in some ways, this is the recreation of that. Even today, there is of course, the Suez Canal, which is a key linking and piece of infrastructure. But it's always susceptible to being having a traffic jam, and of course, there is the problem that if something ever happens there, it'll block off world trade completely. Whereas this new linkage will create an extra way of linking through India's economy to the rest of the world. So being made is, do not have rigid views of how things may pan out. Be clear about what your interests as a country are, and try and pursue those interests in a flexible, fluid way, because the rest of the world also is flexible and fluid. There's no point in digging yourself into hard positions. Now, let me give you another illustration from history to show you how, again, global geopolitics can evolve. Um, I told you about the economic machine between that used to exist 10 years ago, the highways of trade from the Fatimids to the Cholas to the Song Empire, and that world continued essentially till somewhere in the early 13th century, and then a major shock happened to this system, and it happened basically because of marauders coming in from Central Asia. The Mongols sacked Baghdad and and the Middle East. They also sacked China. The Song Empire was under tremendous pressure and ultimately would collapse and be taken over by the the Mongols, and of course in India, the Turks, who were close cousins of the Mongols and had been in fact chased out of Central Asia by the Mongols. They came into India and caused absolute havoc. They sacked our cities, burned down our temples, killed hundreds of millions, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people, and caused havoc. So this trading system between the Middle East through India to China basically broke down because the political construction of now what happens is that this world then goes through a period of chaos because of these disruptions I mentioned, because of Central Asian marauders. Of course, the Central Asian marauders, i.e., the Mongols, by creating this gigantic unified empire, open up the land routes. So there is a period in the 13th century, even early 14th century, where the land routes become very, very important. You know of Marco Polo, for example, who makes his way through the Silk Route to China and back. Do remember that he actually went back through this maritime route. But nevertheless, for once, the Central Asian the land routes became, just as important as the sea routes, because, as I said, there was one unifying group, the Mongols, who held that entire route. Now, that, however, again began to break down by the end of the 1300s into the 1400s. The Mongol Empire collapsed. In China, the Ming Empire came to control things. In southern India, you see
Now that's what I call a stroke of lousy luck. We are facing some inevitable glitches. While our team rectifies the issue, I implore you to be patient with us.
1400s, the Indian Ocean was basically taken over in the west by the Arabs, and in the east by the Majapahit, who ran a Hindu empire in Indonesia. And in China, as I mentioned, you had the Ming Empire. Now, the Ming were very, very conscious that they were rebuilding China after the Mongol conquest. And so they wanted to project power. And so what they did is they built this very powerful navy and put it in charge of a eunuch general called Admiral Zheng He, who then created this huge flotilla and fleet of ships, which this is not a trivial sized fleet, and that then came into came in these great voyages called the treasure fleet, and it came in these great voyages through Southeast Asia into the Indian Ocean world. Now, to give you some sense of how big these were, in each one of these 7 voyages that he did between 1405 and 1433, they involved 25,000 people in each one. So there's 25,000 people, and so this in ancient terms is really huge. And some of the ships they were bringing were also massive. I mean, they were large even by modern standards, and they were 3, 4, 5 times the size of the ships that, for example, Columbus and Vasco da Gama, etc., would be sailing. Now, these ships came down from China through Southeast Asia, where they pushed back against the Majapahit. The Majapahit quite quickly realized that they had no way of resisting this, so they let them pass through, and they came into the Indian Ocean world, and they visited Cochin, they visited Sri Lanka, they visited the African coast, the Yemen coast, and so on. And of course, these were voyages of trade, but do remember 2 things. First, they were not voyages of exploration. By the time that these voyages were happening, these routes from India through to China were very well established for over 1,000 years. And so this was not voyages of exploration as some people have made it out to be. They were, however, voyages of projecting power. And of course, as I mentioned, just like in like China today, having come out of a period of decline, and now having become a large global power again, is very keen on projecting power. This was also true of the Ming. And so these fleets were very much about projecting power. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to have these simply enormous ships and these enormous fleets. I mean, sure, some part of it would probably have got funded by the trade they did, but it is, some of it doesn't seem to be just about that. And indeed, the Admiral Zheng He and his fleet did play a lot of geopolitics in the Indian Ocean region. They tried to change the king of Sri Lanka. They pushed around. Of course, they attacked pirates at various places in the Southeast Asia, and they pushed back against the Majapahit. And in fact, ultimately, they would in fact support the conversion of the king of Malacca to Islam and use them to push back against the Majapahits of Indonesia. So there were all kinds of things that these guys did. So if you had come to the Indian Ocean region in the year 1440, and you said that, look, one great empire is going to dominate the next few centuries, it is almost certainly you would have said, it's the Chinese who are going to do it. Their ships were technologically far advanced, they economically far advanced, they were, they seem to have the military and other hard and soft power to push their way around. In fact, even their rivals, so to speak, like the Majapahit, were clearly coming under pressure from the newly supported Islamic kingdoms that the Chinese had supported in Southeast Asia. However, as things happen in history, sometimes they go off into a completely different spiral. What happens is that the Ming emperor died. And when he died, his successor came to power, backed by the Mandarin bureaucrats of the Chinese court. And the Mandarin bureaucrats were very suspicious of the eunuch lobby in the court, and the eunuchs in the Chinese court were very powerful, and they used to control the navy. So, not surprisingly, they wanted to push back against their rivals in the court, and having placed their candidate on the Ming throne, the Mandarins essentially switched off the money to the navy. So, ironically, the Chinese navy in the 15th century was not defeated by anyone. They were just simply superior to everybody else. But internal dynamics of the Chinese court meant that their funding was completely shut off. And so the great Chinese fleet of Admiral Zheng He would rot in port and eventually fall apart. The records of these great voyages were so thoroughly hidden away and suppressed that's only in the 20th century that we finally people began to dig this stuff up and realize the scale of these operations. But meanwhile, what happens, the Chinese maritime power in the Indian Ocean slowly begins to whittle away. It doesn't happen all of a sudden, but over the next few decades, it slowly whittles away. By certainly the 1480s, the Chinese have basically disappeared from the Indian Ocean. So it is in this context that Vasco da Gama turned up in the Indian Ocean. You sometimes wonder, why is it that a small number of ships from Europe were able to take on and basically take over the Indian Ocean world so quickly, and then of course followed by the Dutch and the French and others. The reason they were able to do this with such ease was because the Chinese had actually been there and they had knocked out everybody else, taken the place over, and then because of their own dynamics simply withered away. So the vacuum that was left effectively was taken over by the Europeans, and this is the beginning of the European colonization of the Indian Ocean world. This is in some sense quite different from the European colonization in, say, for example, the Americas, where they were technologically and far superior societies. The Europeans were far ahead in terms of being able to organize complex societies, in terms of organizing complex finance, and so on. And so all of this was, not true in the Indian Ocean world, where complex societies had existed for a long time, in fact, longer than they had in Europe. They were not entirely ignorant of things like gunpowder. After all, gunpowder is a Chinese invention, and so on. So technologically, they would not have been particularly impressed with the Europeans, at least to begin with, and yet the Portuguese simply took it over. So now, what is the lesson from this? Well, one lesson is, of course, the obvious one. Bad bureaucratic decisions can lead you into a path where a major benefit a country has can be just whittled away. So Chinese mandarins effectively, for their own personal benefit, gave up a major geopolitical tool that they could have utilized. And so they opened up, in fact, the space for the Europeans. Second lesson is that do not assume history will roll itself out in a linear way. I mean, who would have known that a relatively small country out in Europe would come to dominate the Indian Ocean? I mean, Portugal was not even a major European power in the middle of the 1400s. And yet, 50 years later, they were dominating the Indian Ocean world. And certainly by the 1520s, 1530s, Portuguese power had reached all the way through to even the Chinese coast, where they set up a colony in Macau, which only 25 years ago that they gave up finally. So I'm just pointing out to you that these things can pan out in very non-linear ways, which you may not think. So first of all, again, going back to the point, do not have rigid views of how history pans itself out. You can have things that can pan out in non-linear ways. It means that you have to look for opportunities. Opportunities for India's geopolitical expansion will pop up. from the unlikeliest of places. Our job is to therefore maintain our sort of maintain our um, flexibility, geopolitically, economically, and so on, so that when these opportunities appear, we are able to take advantage of them opportunistically. And so the word opportunistic should not be taken as something bad, as very often is supposed to be. And somehow people say, "Oh, why would you want to be opportunistic? It's much better to have these grand plans." Well, the world doesn't move in grand plans; it moves in these entirely unpredictable ways. Those who are flexible and are able to take advantage of these opportunities will always prevail over those who have these deterministic, clear views of the future, which of course are impossible. So this brings us to the next point I make, which is that, look, um, the world is now in a fluid situation. Here, many things will happen. You know, the West will go into decline, but it will still be an important player. The rise of China has thrown things open quite a lot, but their takeover of the world is no more inevitable today than it was, say, at the time of Zheng He. And many other and unpredictable things will happen. Um, and those who take advantage of these opportunities are the ones who will win. After all, the decline and withdrawal of the Chinese could have been easily taken advantage of by, for example, the Vijayanagar Empire in southern India, which was a very prosperous and powerful empire, which was its wealth was based on maritime trade, but somehow, for whatever reason, they did not invest in a powerful navy. So, if, for example, in 1450, it was the Vijayanagar who were investing in a powerful navy, then it is conceivable that we may never have gone through a period of colonial occupation, because they would have fended off the Portuguese and all the others, and we would have had a very different history. So, again, an example how sea blindness of an empire whose entire wealth was based on the sea somehow led us down a particular path. So they simply did not see the opportunity that had popped up on their doorstep. I have spoken now for about 31 minutes. I gave you two examples of that I hopefully illustrated that geopolitics is a very old thing. There are no permanent friends or enemies. There are permanent interests. But the way to pursue these permanent interests is to be flexible, to be opportunistic, and to be willing to invest in naval power, both soft and hard, in order to take advantage of whatever may be the opportunities that will emerge from here on. With that, let me stop, and I'm quite happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Sanjeev. Now it is my privilege indeed to introduce the next speakers, which is a syndicate from INA. And I say this is I'm delighted, and it is a privilege for me simply because it is not often that you get to introduce a syndicate of midshipmen who are presenting a paper at a webinar or at a seminar. And for me, it is the first opportunity where I'm introducing speakers, uh, on an important topic, and the team comprising of these midshipmen. So it's indeed a pleasure, and it's also, I think, a very important takeaway that at a very young age now our trainees at INA not only get exposed to such webinars and seminars, but also present papers, also are given the opportunity to present papers on some of the very relevant and contemporary issues that impact geopolitics and geoeconomics related to the maritime domain. So this INA syndicate, which will be presenting the next paper, has Midshipman Milan Rastogi. Now, all four of them in this team, all of them joined in Jan 2020. Milan himself was the squadron cadet captain of Eagle Squadron. He's been part of the academy basketball team and has earned a half blue in that. And he's been a cross country runner, and he's academically been doing well and been awarded a torch in all his terms except fourth term. I saw from his biodata. I do not know how he missed out in the fourth term. What specifically happened in the fourth term? But in rest of his terms, he has uh, won an academic torch. He has opted for the electrical branch of the Indian Navy, and has also been performing well in competitions like rowing. The next midshipman who's part of this team is Midshipman Shashwat Kundalia. He has been the squadron cadet captain of Daredevil Squadron, half blue in basketball. He's also an athlete and has represented his squadron in athletics championship. And he's been awarded the academic torch in his seventh term. The third midshipman of the team is Midshipman Kapish Naithani. He joined the Daredevil Squadron and was a divisional cadet captain. He was awarded a merit card in air rifle shooting, good cross country runner, and has opted for the mechanical branch. His performance in academics has also been very good. The fourth midshipman of this group is Midshipman Dhruv Singh Dasoon. He joined the Eagle Squadron and was the flotilla captain. Half blue in football, he was awarded the Pereira badge for proficiency in drill. He has also opted for mechanical branch. He has keen interest in machines and their functioning and their performance. He secured gold in rowing competition and was part of the team that went to Bangladesh from the Indian Naval Academy. The INS Syndicate will be presenting their paper on the economic potential of Arctic and Antarctic region, areas of friction and convergence, and its relevance to India. So I'm sure, like me, all others, everyone else is keenly looking forward to hear from the INS Syndicate. Over to the syndicate.
Honorable Chair, Vice Admiral Girish Luthra, Vice Admiral Puneet K. Bahal, Commandant, Indian Naval Academy, esteemed members of the panel, senior officers, audience present in Kautilya, and those watching us online, ladies and gentlemen. The mesmerizing visuals we just played were not taken from a science fiction movie, but are from the Earth's poles. They remain hidden from all of us even till the 20th century. Human curiosity may have led us to extraterrestrial realms, but the polar regions still remain the last frozen frontier. It is high time that we explored the untamed polar regions, where call of the unknown beckons and the quest for resources continues. Today we, the members of the Midshipman Syndicate of Indian Naval Academy, comprising Midshipman Milan Rastogi, Midshipman Kapish Nathani, Midshipman Dhruv Singh Dasoni, and myself, Midshipman Shashwat Kundalia, have the proud privilege to be a part of a session paneled by eclectic and renowned scholars, strategists, experts of diplomacy and warfare. It is truly an honor to present in front of this august gathering a paper on the topic Economic Potential of Arctic and Antarctic Regions and Areas of Convergence Relevant to India. The presentation will be covered under four heads: the last frontier untouched by mankind, why is there a buzz around these regions and a race for economic resources, the Indian Polar Challenge, and India's opportunities in the polar region. Our knowledge in cartography and chart making has evolved through the centuries, from believing that the Earth is flat to the intricate images of Earth taken from satellites. We have come a long way. This is what humans knew how our planet Earth looked in 1500 CE. The black portions on the screen indicate year-wise unmapped areas of the world. Over the centuries, human curiosity and an insatiable hunger of resources has propelled expeditions, leading to the discovery of new lands. The human population jumped a staggering 8 times in the 19th century. It is to cater for the needs of these millions of babies being born every day that an era of colonization dawned. In this gambit, we etched new worlds on our world maps with every passing year, and our blind spots in black on the screen kept reducing. A glaring feature missing from these world maps, even till the 1900s, were the daunting polar regions, the last frontier for daring adventurers and curious scientists. Surprisingly, we discovered Jupiter 200 years before we could accurately chart the polar regions. I let that sink in. The first person to travel to the North Pole was Robert Peary in the year 1909. The discovery of Antarctica has been contested between Captain Fabian of Russia and Captain James Cook of UK. What is intriguing is not who won this contest, but what they found sailing to the end of the earth. The Arctic is the Earth's northernmost region. Its name comes from the Greek word "arctos," which means bear, referring to the northern constellation of Ursa Major. The Arctic is regulated by Arctic Council consisting of 8 nations: Canada, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, Russia, USA, and Sweden. Moving across the globe, we have Antarctica. It is the world's southernmost, highest, driest, windiest, coldest, and iciest continent on Earth. It is the fifth largest continent, encompassing 14.2 million square kilometers, approximately 1.5 times the size of Australia and 3.5 times the size of India. Antarctica's name itself signifies its location as the opposite to the Arctic. Now that all of us are equipped with geographical knowledge of these regions, let us understand why there is a buzz around something that has been frozen for more than a million years. What was thought to be beyond the edge of the world by ancient mariners turned out to be a new world in itself. Any country aspiring to be a world leader will need sufficient resources, a booming economy, and if possible, a peek into the future. The polar regions have it all. In resources, first we have the black gold or petroleum. This most sought after resource has been fueling all nations' trajectory to development. Let us take a look at how much black gold do the white expanses of polar regions contain. The picture highlights the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, which holds 80% of Earth's known petroleum reserves. As we can see from the map, the polar regions do not form a part of the OPEC group, but their untapped potential will leave you awestruck. In 2008, the United States Geological Survey estimated the presence of staggering quantities of untapped oil and gas north of the Arctic Circle, a potential reserve of 90 billion barrels of oil, 1.67 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, and 44 billion barrels of natural gas liquids. To put it in perspective, the Arctic reserves can independently power India for 250 years and independently sustain all global demands of petroleum for 12 years. While there are no proven oil reserves in Antarctica, Rosneft, Russia's largest mineral exploration company, in 2020 found a stunning 500 billion barrels of oil and gas in East Antarctica's Indian Ocean sector. 500 billion barrels is 15 times the global annual oil consumption. These reserves could independently power India for 350 years. Next in resources, we have minerals. The rare earth elements, or REEs, are a group of 17 elements with unique metallurgical, catalytic, electrical, magnetic, and optical properties. The current distribution around the world of these elements is as flash. As its visual, India's share is just 5.61%. REEs find hundreds of industrial applications and have no known alternatives. Some of the critical applications in the field of production of green energy, military, and modern technology are as flashed on the screen. Antarctica's historic association to the Gondwana supercontinent, alongside mineral-rich lands like Australia, Africa, and South America, have led to a scientific belief of a real-life treasure map waiting to be explored. Of the limited exploration that has been possible, mineral occurrences are as flashed. If mined, the polar regions could end up holding 64% of the Earth's rare earth elements. A growing population means increasing number of stomachs to fill. Here is where freshwater and fisheries come into play. Of all the water on Earth, only 3% is fresh, of which polar regions contain almost 69% of world's freshwater, and India has only 4% of world's freshwater reserve. So is this 4% sufficient? India receives 4,000 billion cubic meters of rainfall annually against a requirement of 3,000 billion cubic meters. India also underutilizes the available 20% of Indus Waters Treaty by using only 4% of it. Coming to Brahmaputra, despite being a lower riparian nation to China, currently India does not have any water sharing treaty. Though India has ample rainfall and an underutilized Indus Waters Treaty, complex parameters such as heavy dependence on monsoon, increasing population, climate change, geopolitical tensions with our immediate neighbors make it challenging to rely on this 4%. We should never underestimate our thirst for water. While the polar regions might contain vast amount of water, the challenge of transporting it might make it unfeasible. Now moving to fisheries. Currently 189,000 tons of fish is caught in the Arctic annually, and 1 lakh tons of krill is caught yearly in the Antarctic. India, on the other hand, has fish production of 40 lakh tons, which makes India the third largest fish producing country. Additionally, India has the second largest aquaculture industry with a total production of 120 lakh tons. Due to heavy dependence of the agriculture industry on monsoons, flash floods, and unpredictable droughts due to climate change, exploiting sustainable seafood may be the answer for India's challenge of food security, and the poles seem to provide a solution. It is hence evident that the polar regions have abundant resources. Nation in the form of new avenues to world trade. The shipping industry accounts for 90% of the world's trade. They are the backbone of world economy. The Arctic, with its melting ice, is a game changer. These passages have the potential to optimize voyages by up to 40%, reducing costs and transit times. Let's explore these Arctic routes. Northeast Passage would run from Japan to UK via Russia. Northwest Passage would connect the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans. Transpolar Passage, a presently hypothetical route. It will link Bering Strait and the Atlantic Ocean. These routes, once available round the year, will lead to reduction in substantial traveling time. Northeast Passage would reduce 15 days of transit time between Tokyo in Japan to Rotterdam in Netherlands. Northwest Passage would reduce 8 days of transit time between Tokyo in Japan and New York in USA. India, though not directly part of these trade routes, the second order implications are sure to affect our country. Reduced distances equals reduced consumer cost and therefore a boom to the economy. Further, it will reduce the dependence on high pressure choke points, Suez Canal and Panama Canal. After having traversed through the economic potential of polar regions, let us see how these regions can also give us a peek into the future. The video simulates how the world would look if all the polar ice melted. As you can see from the video, many iconic cities would submerge due to significant sea level rise, threatening coastal areas worldwide. The aim of scientific expeditions to the polar regions is estimating sea level rise, assisting coastal planning, studying the influence of melting ice on global weather patterns, and optimizing shipping routes. Coming to India, as you can see on the screen, melting of all polar ice would lead to submerging of major cities like Mumbai, Kochi, and Kolkata. Further, the state of Gujarat would turn into an island. Himalayan regions in India is estimated to have the world's third largest reservoir of ice after polar regions and is thus referred to as the third pole. What we learn in polar regions could one day become crucial in predicting the effects of and preparing for melting of Himalayas. Thus, the polar regions are like nature's favorite areas to hide its pirate's chest of resources. One might wonder, what has India done to explore these hidden treasures? In 1983, the first scientific base station in Antarctica, Dakshin Gangotri, was established, about 2,500 kilometers from the south. It was constructed during India's third expedition to Antarctica. Interestingly, a post office was also set up, and over the years, of course of its lifetime, it received and sent thousands of letters. The base ensured India becoming a consultative member of the Antarctic Treaty of 1959. The station is now decommissioned. Moving on to 1989, a dedicated team from the Indian Army embarked on a mission to construct India's second research base in Antarctica. The building was erected on steel stilts and has since then stood the test of time. It can accommodate 25 scientific inventors. Now, if we travel about 3,000 kilometers east of Maitri, we come across India's new research base, Bharti, which was commissioned in 2012. The station can accommodate 72 scientists throughout the year. It is also being used by ISRO as Antarctica ground station for Earth observation satellites. It receives Indian remote sensing satellite raw data and sends this data to Hyderabad. As we can see on the screen, the opposite end of the globe, nestled in the Arctic region, is Ezhimala, India's inaugural permanent Arctic research station, established in 2008. It is situated in Svalbard, Norway, within the International Arctic Research Base, just 1,200 kilometers to north. India is the 11th country to set up a scientific research base in the Arctic region. A little towards north, we also have a submerged moon observatory, the INDA. It was deployed in 2014 at Svalbard in Norway, and its main goal is to study the Arctic climate. The National Center for Polar and Ocean Research in Goa is the single point command for all the research stations and expeditions in the polar region. It has been functional since 25th May 1998 under the administration of Ministry of Earth Sciences, Government of India. Publishing of India's Arctic policy in 2022 and the introduction of the Indian Antarctic Bill in Lok Sabha last year are a clear acknowledgement of the polar region's importance. Our pale blue dot of the planet is about 70% water and only 30% land. It is in this India's meager 2.4% of land that we aspire to fulfill the dream of 1.4 billion, which accounts for a staggering 18% of the world's population. Despite scarcity of land and resources, India has never invaded any country. Antarctica, devoid of any indigenous populace, might be a peaceful solution to our challenge. Now, after realizing the potential of these regions, the following questions arise. Is having 3 polar bases sufficient? Why aren't we mining and drilling the polar region? Why doesn't the armed forces have a polar theater command to protect our interests yet? To answer these questions, I would like to invite Midshipman Kapish Nepal.
Thank you, Shashwat. While the economic potential of polar regions are enticing, they are not without their more than fair share of challenges. Towering in front of us like a giant is the geographical challenge. With an average wind speed of 70 kilometers per hour, gusting up to 327 kilometers per hour. On a normal day, standing in these regions would feel as if you're standing in the middle of a storm. The average temperature throughout the year is minus 40 degrees Celsius, which plummets to minus 80 degrees during peak winters. If we wear 2 sweaters to visit Manali, which is 70 degrees warmer, imagine how many jerseys would suffice to keep us warm in the polar region. Further, a prolonged absence of sunlight for up to 6 months at a stretch makes these regions inhospitable, and surviving there a formidable challenge to mankind. Coming to the second challenge, economic viability of operations. The port closest to India in the Arctic Circle is the port of Murmansk, which is 9,012 nautical miles away. While in the Antarctic Circle, it is Port Foster, which is 4,635 nautical miles away. These shared distances compound the geographical challenge and restrict maintaining of economically viable logistical lines. Further, it is almost 2 to 10 times more expensive to develop an oil or gas field in the polar region. The next challenge is uncharted waters. The new Arctic trade routes remain to a large extent hypothetical, mainly for two reasons. Mapping of these areas has been severely affected due to the unavailability of ice-free routes around the year. Secondly, though the ice sheets are reducing progressively, they do not follow a linear trend. The annual Arctic sea ice area hit a lifetime low in 2012, but increased by almost 2 million square kilometers in 2013. Thus, these trends are, as of now, unpredictable. Coming to Arctic specific challenges, India faces dual challenge in asserting territorial claims in the region. First, India is 9,012 nautical miles away and lacks direct access to the Arctic Ocean, thereby precluding India its inclusion in the Arctic Council, which primarily governs the region. Furthermore, the Arctic region is already subject to territorial disputes and competing claims amongst Arctic nations, creating a complex geopolitical landscape that presents diplomatic challenges for asserting new claims. Moving on to the final challenge. With increasing world population and changing geopolitical scenarios, new hot zones of contention like the present day South China Sea are in the making. The next such impending bone of contention would be Antarctica, which is the closest port to Antarctica. Where is China planning to develop a naval base? An answer common to both these questions is Ushuaia in Tierra del Fuego, Argentina. This development bears a striking resemblance to the Pakistan's Gwadar port. This region would turn into a choke point in the future because the port of Ushuaia and the archipelago of Antarctica are less than 500 miles apart. So, having covered what the polar regions offer, what challenges India faces, and what we as a nation have done till now, let's look at what actionable opportunities does India have. First, let's cover our opportunities common to both Arctic and Antarctic. We have four major points under this head. Satellite images are one of the most powerful and important tools we have for monitoring the Earth. India has the opportunity to expand its collaborative efforts with NASA through the joint NASA-ISRO Synthetic Aperture Radar NISAR satellite initiative. The NISAR satellite is slated for launch in the initial months of 2024, with half of its instruments dedicated to studying Antarctica. Second, hydrographic surveys measures and describe the physical features of the navigable portion of the Earth's surface and adjoining coastal areas. Indian Navy's National Hydrographic Office has been an integral part of all Antarctic expeditions to chart the region for smooth operations in the area. A similar detachment to the Arctic is also in the works. Third, a collaboration between civil agencies and military is important not only to survive in these places, but also as a tool for legitimate presence of military forces in these areas. Lastly, India is completely dependent on other countries for icebreakers and other heavy machinery capable of operating in sub-zero conditions. This might not be an issue today, but future hostilities could render us incapable of sustaining our scientific research stations. In consonance to this, the Union Earth Sciences Minister, Mr. Kiran Rijiju, stated recently that India aims to have its first polar research vessel in the next 5 years in order to sustain its bases in Antarctica. The Indian Navy is the preeminent maritime force of the country, and therefore it is imperative we expand to the polar regions to safeguard national interests. A little crystal gazing brings out the following possible opportunities for the Indian Navy. First, to assert territorial claims by construction of a permanent base in Antarctica to protect Indian assets and conduct search and rescue operations. The Indian Armed Forces' unparalleled experience operating in the world's highest battlefield, the Siachen glaciers, will compound our operational capability in the region. Second, the polar regions provide us with a great opportunity to exercise Indian Navy's pursuit of being combat ready, credible, cohesive, and future-proof. To look beyond Indian waters it is imperative to undertake requisite post structuring to include submarines, aircrafts, and ships capable of operating in sub zero conditions. This could be driven by a dedicated department of polar operations, which would generate strategic outlook as to what the Indian Navy can do to realize the potential of polar regions. In terms of logistical support, the Navy can play a pivotal role by assisting research expeditions with transportations, supplies, and infrastructure. Lastly, the Indian Navy's rich history of collaborating with naval forces worldwide positions it favorably for multinational partnerships in the polar region. Such collaborations promote coordination, mutual understanding, data sharing, and equipment sharing amongst the nations engaged in polar research. It also helps us to adopt the best practices. Having covered common opportunities, let us move to the three specific opportunities in Arctic. Whilst we have found that Indian claim in the Arctic region has many challenges, there still exists an avenue for India to reap the benefits of the area, and that is collaboration with the Arctic nations. Currently, Indian companies have made significant investments exceeding $7 billion in this region. For instance, ONGC Videsh Limited holds a substantial 20% stake in the Sakhalin 1 oil and gas field. Furthermore, two Indian companies, namely Petronet LNG and H Energy, have entered into agreements to procure liquefied natural gas from Novatek, a Russian gas producer operating in the Arctic. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov had stated that India may become the first non-Arctic state to engage in mineral extraction in the Arctic. Next, engaging with the Arctic Council, India must appoint a dedicated senior Arctic official, similar to what the Arctic states and certain non-Arctic observers already have. The National Center for Polar and Ocean Research, which is presently engaged in data sharing with only the Norwegian Polar Institute, should broaden its cooperation with other research institutions like the Arctic Consortium, thereby deepening India's comprehension of the intricate aspects of the Arctic environment. As we take you to the third section of India's opportunity, which in our estimate is the most vital, I invite Midshipman Dhruv Dasani to elaborate on India's opportunities in Antarctica.
Thank you, Kapish. The sheer distance between India and the Arctic Circle, existing geopolitical scenarios, and proximity of the Arctic region to the three most developed continents limits India's opportunities in the Arctic region to a certain degree. But this is not the same for Antarctic. At first, we have possibility of claim. As is shown in figure, there are various national claims in the region. However, unlike Arctic, they have no legal basis. Further, the Antarctic Treaty of 1959 prohibiting ownership of land, mining and drilling in the region is also set for review in 2048. Presence of tourists and scientists in Antarctica is considered as a non-military tool for diplomacy towards future territorial claims. This pie chart depicted on screen shows India's current share of just 1.7% of the scientific community. The next pie chart depicts share of tourism in the continent, where as of now, India is yet to make a mark. Thus, we have immense scope for expansion in both the avenues. Moving on to the second point, a public discovery of 500 billion barrels of natural gas and oil in Antarctica in proximity to the Indian Ocean region was made. This finding might just reduce India's dependency on OPEC and provide much needed energy security in the coming years. Lastly, Antarctica, if utilized to its full potential, will turn into a gateway to a more prosperous and self-reliant Atmanirbhar Bharat. The mining of the vast deposits of rare earth elements will propel major futuristic industries like radars, automobile and communication, microprocessors, robotics and space, thereby realizing India's aim of becoming a $40 trillion economy. To summarize, India is blessed with a rich maritime boundary stretching to 7,517 kilometers. Since time immemorial, this vast coastline has been a hub for world trade, but melting of polar ice may alter this coastline and submerge a major cities, making polar research an important aspect. The resource-rich frozen frontier of Arctic has been an elusive nectar controlled by the most advanced nations on Earth due to their close proximity. The sheer distance from India and the closed-door extraction of resources by these nations has stunted India's opportunity. Despite the odds, India's resilience and clever foreign tactics has ensured presence of national interest in the region. Though collaboration in Arctic is of immediate importance, the crux remains to use it more as a sandbox to test the feasibility of a future endeavors in the Antarctic. Antarctic being void of any choke points, having an uninterrupted direct line of navigation to India, and exploitation of its resources being in its nascent stage makes it ripe for the taking. It is geologically far away from most developed nations, making for an even playing field wherein India might thrive if focused upon adequately. Developing ties with countries close to Antarctica, such as Argentina, South Africa, Madagascar, and Australia, is crucial for India sustaining its presence in Antarctic. Ladies and gentlemen, Arctic's current oil fields are bound to dry up, and resources would become sparsely available. In the decades to come, a few developed nations, having extracted all of Arctic's luster, will turn their heads to the global south, that is, Antarctica, which has been conveniently labeled untouchable until 2048. At that instant, India must not miss the bus and should have a bold and viable claim of Antarctica riding on scientific research, tourist presence, and assertion of claim by the maritime power of the country, which is the Indian Navy. The writing is on the wall, and the facilitator towards guaranteeing India's food and energy security in the future would be the Indian Navy. It is a mission not so impossible should we choose to accept it. With this, we have come to the end of our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for a very comprehensive presentation. And it is now time for me to move on for the third part of this session, for which we are very delighted to have with us a very distinguished speaker, Vice Admiral M.S. Pawar. Admiral Pawar is an alumnus of Sainik School, Korkonda, and National Defense Academy, Khadagwasla. He was commissioned on 1st July 1982. He was the best all-round cadet of his course and stood first in the year-long sub-lieutenant technical courses. He's specialized in navigation and direction and has held many staff and command appointments. He was the navigating officer on Magar during Operation Pavan in Sri Lanka and fleet navigating officer of Western Fleet during the Kargil War. He's been the fleet operations officer of Western Fleet during anti-piracy patrols in the Gulf of Aden. He has commanded Nashak, Kuthar, and Talwar. He's been on deputation to Mauritius, where he commanded the 1st Patrol Vessel Squadron, their flagship MCGS Vigilant, and has been he headed the Mauritius National Coast Guard during 2003. He has been Flag Officer Sea Training, where operational sea training was his primary responsibility. Thereafter, Chief of Staff, Southern Naval Command. He moved on to be the Flag Officer, Maharashtra and Gujarat Naval Area. and also was the first flag officer commanding Gujarat Daman Diu naval area, that is Fogna. As Vice Admiral, he was the Director General of Project Seabird, and thereafter Chief of Staff, Eastern Naval Command. As the Deputy Chief of Naval Staff, he has overseen a number of major operations undertaken by the Indian Navy, including operations following the terrorist attacks in Pulwama, Operation Sankalp in the Persian Gulf when we had the US-Iran tensions going on, operations undertaken post the LAC standoff after the Galwan incident with China, and Operation Samudra Setu during COVID-19 pandemic. Apart from operations, he's undertaken various jobs in the Navy looking after foreign cooperation, intelligence, aviation, space, communications, special operations, cyber. So the list is very long. He is an alumnus of the Royal Naval Staff College, UK, College of Naval Warfare, Mumbai, and National Defense College, New Delhi. He holds a double MPhil in Defense and Strategic Studies from the universities of Mumbai and Madras. The university is Madras University, although the city is now Chennai. He superannuated from Naval Service on 31st May 2021 and continues to make rich contributions through his participation in various naval and other strategic activities. We are delighted to have him join us today to speak on India's influence in the Indian Ocean region for development and security. Over to you, Admiral Pawar.
Thank you, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, you are audible.
Is my slides visible? Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for that generous introduction. Admiral Luthra, the chairperson of this session, my senior fellow navigator and a role model, Admiral Punit Bahel, Commandant of the Indian Naval Academy, my dear cadets, ladies and gentlemen. It is a proud privilege for me to be here amongst you today, though virtually not as enchanting as it would have been had I been present there physically. But at the very outset, I must place on record my appreciation to the last syndicate for the outstanding audio-visual treat their presentation made. And if this is the standard of Indian Naval Academy's cadets, I have no doubt that the future of the Indian Navy is in good hands. So bravo Zulu, Commandant. Secondly, I must compliment the coordinating team for their lovely seminar brochure, where they have indicated on the cover a portrait of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, the founder of the Maratha Navy. And there can be no better military icon in terms of wisdom, character, courage, or leadership than the Chhatrapati to inspire the future leaders of the largest navy in the Indian Ocean region and the most professional navy in the world. 12th October, ladies and gentlemen, is a very special day with regard to the topic of my presentation. It was on this day in 1999 that President Musharraf, then General Musharraf, seized power in a bloodless coup in Pakistan, pushing the region into some sort of instability that continues to rate. On 12th October 2000, in Aden, was attacked USS Cole by terrorist-laden terrorist boat, and 2 years later, we had the Bali bombings in Bali, that is terrorism from the sea. These three events are very relevant as we go ahead during my talk, because I talk on security and development in the Indian Ocean region. We've had a session this morning on Mahan and Corbett and sea power. I'm not going to dwell upon that at all, except to highlight that the world has changed. It is not for me to say that those great men are irrelevant, but the fact is that new domains of warfare have emerged. It was a singular domain, surface of the sea then. We have the submarines, air, space, cyber, and informational domains. And the world has changed very vastly because globalization, not only in terms of supply chains, but also in ownership of ships, their regulation, their difficulties in interdicting trade, the emergence of social media, open source intelligence, private satellites, unmanned systems have all altered many concepts which will underpin warfare as Mahan saw it during that period of 1660 to for the next 100 years. We have also seen new forms of warfare, such as legal warfare, public opinion warfare, gray zone warfare, psychological warfare, which have taken center stage. And we see countries aiming to win wars even without fighting using these tactics. The Indian Ocean comprises about 1/5 of the planet's waters. 38 countries that are littoral here are home to 38% of the world population, and 66% of energy traffic, 50% of the container shipping, and 1/3 of the bulk cargo shipments travels through the waters of the Indian Ocean. You see, this small body of water is the smallest ocean amongst the Pacific, Atlantic, and the Indian. It is the hottest, the warmest ocean, and the least concentration of oxygen levels are prevalent in these waters. And as was brought out this morning and also in this afternoon, it's the only ocean named after a country. And you see India's dominating peninsula jetting out there southwards, which has got great geostrategic importance. These waters of the IOR can be accessed only through choke points. You know them by heart now: the Suez Canal to the various straits of Hormuz, Bab el Mandeb to the west, Malacca and Singapore Straits, Sunda, Lombok, Ombay, and Wetar Straits, and the waters of the Mozambique Channel, the 9-degree channel in the Lakshadweep Islands, the waters south of the Indira Point, that is the 6-degree channel, are all navigationally important too. Unlike the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans, which were barriers to human movement, the Indian Ocean has been a bridge linking civilizations from China to India to Iraq and then overland to the Mediterranean. The prevalence of the unique phenomenon of monsoons and seasonal currents have shaped the nature of connections, commerce, and interactions, both religious and cultural, across these waters. In a way, the Indian Ocean world was the first global economy, and India and in the Indian Ocean was a center of gravity. To look at the India's influence in the Indian Ocean region, we must note that the size, location, and civilizational antiquity of our country always had a benign sort of influence in the affairs of the Indian Ocean region. It is from this civilizational ethos that we advocate the concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, meaning the world is but one family, and propagate the concepts of one earth, one family, one future, or themes such as Sabka Saath, Sabka Vishwas, Sabka Prayas, and things like that, both domestically and internationally. It is with this spirit that India recently championed the entry of African Union into the Global 20 or G20 club, or the Prime Minister during the BRIC summit hailing the Chandrayaan-3 success, belonging not just to India but to the entire humanity. Security and development, as you know, are complementary. You cannot have one without the other. Some may tend to think it is possible, but you very well know what happened in Somalia or what is happening presently in Israel. Israel can be very, very developed, but there is no security unless there is development in the rim of your country, along the borders of your country or rim of the Indian Ocean region. One of the major challenges or the primary challenge is of capacity deficits in the Indian Ocean region. We have small countries who have got very large exclusive economic zones, but very limited law enforcing capacities. Take the example of two countries, Mauritius and Seychelles. Mauritius, with a land area of just over 2,000 square kilometers and a population of just 1.3 million, has an EEZ equivalent to India's 2.3 million square kilometers. And India has got a navy which is one of the largest and most professional in the world. And you can compare that with the Mauritian National Coast Guard, which got limited capacities. How do we expect Mauritius to look after her maritime interests? Seychelles, even more glaring, 450 square kilometers of area, just 90,000 people population, and 1.3 million square kilometers, that is 56% of India's EEZ. Added to this, the Indian Ocean region has security threats across a very broad canvas, from the nuclear threats at the higher level to the non-traditional threats. You will see that the IOR has got the maximum concentration of nuclear power, and it is the most unstable regions in the world. The Pakistani nuclear proliferation was caught red-handed a few years back. We have got now Iran on the verge of nuclear capability, and if that happens, we'll soon see Saudi Arabia following in the wake. In terms of conventional wars, we have seen 5 decades of, and even before that, I'm just taking 5 decades for an example, continuous warfare. And this has added to instability in the maritime domain. We have had the Iran-Iraq war, we have got the first and second Gulf wars, the global war on terror, and various wars in Sudan, Yemen, Eritrea, Somalia, the Kargil war, the post Pulwama and post Galwan situations where there was every fear and concern that the conflict could spill over to the maritime domain, and we have the ongoing instability in Cabo Delgado province of Mozambique, and of course the ongoing crisis in Israel. Israel, you must know, through the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aqaba, they have a port in the Indian Ocean called the port of Eilat, next to the Jordan River. So also there is this unsavory Sino-Pak strategic nexus, which is revisionist in nature. Both of these countries have unresolved boundaries with India, and both of them have an anti-India focus. And we have seen after Vijay, that is Kargil crisis, as well as during the Galwan crisis, serious concerns about posturing in the maritime domain. If one were to look at the Chinese conduct and disdain for international rules-based order in the South China Sea, we know what is going to happen when China comes in strength in the Indian Ocean region. Also, there is a tremendous jostling of extra-regional naval powers in the Indian Ocean region. Thanks to the Somalian piracy, it has attracted a large number of foreign warships, and at any given time, there are at least 100 warships, submarines, research vessels in the Indian Ocean region. A number of countries, in fact, every foreign country which is a member of the P5 has got naval base here. You've got France, which is technically a resident Indian ocean power with the largest exclusive economic zone, over 9 million square kilometers. It's got a base, his home base in Reunion, and of course, bases in Djibouti and Abu Dhabi. The United States has a base in Diego Garcia, which does not belong to it, leased on from the United Kingdom, which also is not the true owner. It is actually awarded to Mauritius by the International Court of Justice. The United States has got the US Fifth Fleet element of the NAV sent in Bahrain. They got bases in Djibouti, Oman, Qatar, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia. United Kingdom, the last colonial power here, has bases in Bahrain, Qatar, and Oman. Russia has negotiated a base in Port Sudan. China has got its crown jewel in Djibouti, and of course, the vassal state of Pakistan, and many dependencies created by Belt and Road Initiative, as well as uh, arms transfers to various militaries. Japan has got a base in Djibouti. Thanks to these instabilities, this terrorism, piracy, and ongoing civil conflicts, notwithstanding the fact that there has been no piracy attack in the last few years, the Lloyd's Joint War Committee listed areas are still in force, and we have got the Bab al Mandeb, the Gulf of Aden, the waters of Somalia, Gulf of Oman, Persian Gulf, the Straits of Hormuz, the territorial waters of Sudan, part of Eritrea, of course, Saudi Arabia on both the coasts in the Red Sea as well as in the Gulf, Iraq, United Arab Emirates, Iran, Somalia, of course, Pakistan, then the Cabo Delgado province of Mozambique. These are all listed war areas and high risk areas. Coming to numerous traditional threats, they are hardly traditional. It was repeatedly brought out this morning by various speakers of piracy having been prevalent in these waters for a very long time. But last 2 decades have seen tremendous incidents and instability stemming from the ripple effects of instability on land in Somalia. And it has drawn into the IOR, as I said before, a large number of extra-regional forces. Though piracy-related HRA has been withdrawn since January this year, Somali pirates retain the capacity to carry out attacks in the entire northwest Indian Ocean region. On the eastern approaches to the Indian Ocean, in the Straits of Malacca and Singapore, Recap Singapore has reported that in 2022, there has been a 2% rise in armed robberies in the Western Pacific. I mentioned about the terrorist attack on USS Cole on 12th October 2000. Terrorism at sea and from sea is a reality. We had the case of merchant tanker Limburg, a French flag tanker, who was attacked off Yemen as she was leaving harbor in October 2002, which led to spillage of 12,000 tons of oil into the sea. The terrorist attacks in Mumbai 1993 and 26/11 by terrorists from Pakistan were facilitated by movement of explosives, arms, and terrorists from the sea. More recently, we had 4 ships being attacked in Fujairah in May 19. In Jeddah, we had the tanker being attacked, Japanese tanker being attacked in 2020. And just last week, we had Hamas using the sea route to carry out a multi-directional attack on Israeli territory. The ongoing incidents and threats have rightly caused the high-risk areas to be promulgated by the Joint War Committee. The next threat pertains to narcotics, smuggling, and gun running. Unfortunately or fortunately, either side of India are the 2 primary sources of production of narcotics. We have the Golden Triangle. The 2 of these countries, that is Thailand and Myanmar, have shores that touch the waters of the Indian Ocean. Similarly, the Golden Crescent, comprising Afghanistan, Iran, and Pakistan, have 2 countries which share the waters of the North Arabian Sea, that is Iran and Pakistan. Apart from the socio-economic human costs of narcotics, they also impact other non-traditional threats because the proceeds from narcotics smuggling are plowed back into other domains to promote those threats. Human trafficking and illegal immigration happens in a very large area. It doesn't happen only in the Mediterranean. It is seen to be very large in the Mediterranean because the BBC and the Western media highlight it. We have seen the plight of the Rohingyas from Myanmar, Tamils from Sri Lanka, and Arabs and Africans from Somalia, Sudan, Yemen, and Eritrea. The only difference between human trafficking and illegal immigration being that the first one, trafficking, is done coercively by deceit or by force, and illegal immigration happens because of climatic stresses, lack of governance, finding better livelihoods, and things like that. It is more voluntary than coercive. We have illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing, on which the Maritime Security Coordinator is going to speak to you tomorrow, so I won't dwell on it. But this was touted as one of the reasons of Somalian piracy taking roots. The vessels used for IUU fishing can also be used to move terrorists or arms or explosives or smuggle people. And it is said or estimated that 1 out of every 5 fish on your dining table comes from IUU fishing. Ghost fishing is another threat which pertains to unintentional fishing caused by abandoned or lost nets which have been discarded at sea. They cause damage to the marine ecosystems and really torture fish which are trapped in those discarded nets. It is estimated that about 48,000 tons of nets are lost or discarded in the oceans every year, and you can imagine what havoc they must be creating to the marine life. Marine pollution, I talked about empty Limburg, but there are various sources of marine pollution. Oceans, are great carbon sinks and generators of oxygen. This oxygen, in turn, is used by the marine life, which in turn sustain fish and uh, uh, provide food security and proteins to the human population. Pollution of seas causes acidification of seawater, reducing their oxygen generating capacity, affecting food security. Oil spills, toxic waste dumping, and radioactive waste. Of course, you see the the radioactive waste being pumped out from the Japanese nuclear plant now, which is within the limits, of course, of the World Health Organization guidelines. But radioactive waste dumping at sea, plastics and microplastics. About 14 million tons of plastics flow into the oceans every year, comprising 80% of the ocean debris. Untreated sewage from the growing populations, chemicals runoff from fertilized fields affect the quality of sea waters. And as I mentioned, it has effect not only on food chain but also on tourism and coastal economy. Global warming, much has been said by my predecessors indicate, and I'll only mention to you that oceans are heat sinks and climate regulators. And and that's the reason Antarctica and the Arctic are melting. We saw some picture of submergence of our coastal areas and cities. But apart from that, cyclones and super cyclones have become regular. Storm surges, fires, floodings, famines, inundation of coasts and islands. Some countries like Maldives, for example, Bangladesh, would be tremendously affected. And where will they all go? They're not going to go to China for sure. They'll be India bound for matters of conveniences and historical and civilization linkages. Salination of freshwater resources and soil in coastal areas will cause effects on agriculture. It's already happening in Pakistan in the Indus Delta, and happening in Bangladesh. Displacement of large populations, receding glaciers because of global warming will have effect on Himalayan rivers, which are source of fresh water for our agriculture and teeming population. China has mastered gray zone threats, and oceans provide connectivity. It is not only good things come from the oceans, Even bad influences can find way through the states of Malacca and Sunda and Lombok. And these are operations below the intensity of conventional warfare. And Chinese distant water fishing fleet, which is the largest fishing extra-regional fishing fleet in the Indian Ocean region, can be leveraged by China to indulge in gray zone threats within the Indian Ocean region too. Undersea cables, pipelines, and seabed security is an important factor. In fact, France has just last year promulgated its seabed security strategy. We don't have one as yet, but cables are critical to data flow, and you cannot imagine what would happen to a damage if the subsea cable security is compromised. We had just on last Sunday the Baltic connector cable and gas pipeline between Finland and Estonia getting damaged, and Finland claims it is by human elements uh, affecting the energy and data security of those countries. The African cable damage in August this year uh, put Western African nations out of internet connections. The Nord Stream pipeline damage in September last year is well known. You must bear in mind that the Indian IT industry exports $194 billion worth in services, which is a huge component of our GDP. And any damage to our seabed cable would have severe consequences to our economy, because it is not only the software industry which is exporting, but it has got cascading and domino effects on every sector, including health and power, and which are where the IT is only an enabler. It is not a part of the GDP. Blue economy vulnerables, we are going to have a section on this. So as blue economy takes root, power, offshore power generation, which Admiral Arun Prakash mentioned in the morning, the power cables will be on the seabed. So seabed infrastructure security is a major concern. This is the Nord Stream pipeline I mentioned, the African cable which was damaged in August 23. Coming to the health of the Indian Ocean itself, the last syndicate has covered it, but I'll just give you a few points. 2.3 million square kilometers of EEZ for the blue economy, 100% IT dependence on subsea cables, 100% energy imports by sea, 90% trade by sea, 49%, that mark in red is very important. 49%. Somebody mentioned 38%. That is wrong. Latest figures are 49% of our GDP. Trade, international trade, which happens by the sea, is the trade to GDP ratio is 49%. 10% of global seafarers are Indians, and the 2.4 million Indian diaspora residing in the Indian Ocean region remit about $65 billion to home country every year. Compare that now with the foreign exchange reserves of Pakistan, for example, and you get a picture. The Indian Ocean health impacts the monsoon, and we already have been impacted this year by the Kharif season. We have got rain deficient. It will see the havoc it's going to cause on the Indian economy. If the monsoon gets disrupted, it affects the Indian economy and the future of India itself. What has been India's approach in the Indian Ocean region? It is based on our historic ties and linkages, shared colonial legacies, and developmental aspirations, because we're all under developing countries. India's independence has been a catalyst for the independence of other countries, and they look up to India as a role model. India is an ancient civilization with pluralistic and diverse society, a functional constituent democracy, which is perhaps an exceptional country in that she has not had any military coups. It is the largest in size, in sea power, in terms of population, economy, nuclear, space, IT, digital public infrastructure, audit, judiciary, and institutions. You name it, and we are the largest in the Indian Ocean region. And therefore, whatever happens to this 1/6 of humanity and this large country automatically wields a great great positive impact and influence by default into the Indian Ocean region. India's progress on the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and 169 targets under that would be emulated by others, and therefore, India, in a way, needs to be a role model. As it is said, a rising tide lifts all boats, and India's rise will automatically lift other economies in the region, bringing security and development in turn. What is India's vision for the Indian Ocean region? It has our relationship with the Indian Ocean region is non-predatory in the spirit of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Unlike some other countries who indulge in non-transparent, with hidden agendas, debt trap projects, with ulterior motives to gain leverages for port access, political influence, etc., we are transparent, trustworthy. Prime Minister Modi in 2015, on his visit to Seychelles to unveil the coastal radar stations gifted by India, and the commissioning of Mauritius National Coast Guard ship Barracuda at Port Louis, voiced his vision for the Indian Ocean region, and which he encapsulated as Sagar, security and growth for all in the region. In terms of his vision for the Indo-Pacific, just a couple of years later in 2018 in the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, he talked of the Indo-Pacific, and India is a part of the Indo-Pacific. Indian Ocean region is a part of the Indo-Pacific, a free, open, inclusive, rules-based, peaceful, with peaceful settlement of disputes, with respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, which is based on Samman, Samvad, Sahyog, Shanti, and Samruddhi. And we also have ASEAN. The 10 countries of ASEAN, 5 of them are Indian Ocean rim countries. The centrality of our Indo-Pacific vision. Just yesterday, or the day before, our external affairs minister said and voiced similar sentiments at the IORA conference in Colombo. Similar lines about, and he in fact added one more, saying that the UNCLOS would be, as far as we are concerned, as far as the IORA is concerned, the constitution of the seas. India has been very generous. She has walked the talk in terms of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam principle in settlement of maritime disputes. It was mentioned this morning, India has accepted an unfavorable decision of the Permanent Court of Arbitration under UNCLOS and ceded to Bangladesh a very large area in the Bay of Bengal. Similarly, we have ceded Kachitivo Island to Sri Lanka in 1974. The effects of this are not even not accepted domestically in Tamil Nadu even to date, and we have this problem ongoing. But India has walked the talk. Unlike, for example, look at China's example. Same year, they had a dispute, and the Permanent Court of Arbitration provided a judgment in favor of the Philippines, and China has refused to accept, despite the fact that China is a signatory to the UNCLOS 82 and is a rising world power. And she was tom-tomming the idea of peaceful rise, but this is no way. And just last week, she has driven away the Philippine Coast Guard from the waters of one of the shoals, which is contested. India has contributed to security by undertaking maritime intervention ops. I'll just cite two: Maldives Op Cactus in 1988, where INS Godavari, returning from Australia, and INS Betwa sailed from Cochin and captured the MV Progress Light and sunk it, whilst rescuing all the hostages from the terrorists and also rescuing the terrorists. Indian Navy played a prominent role in Operation Pawan in 1987-99, where I was myself the navigating officer of INS Magar, which was keenly participating in this operation. And we lost more than 1,600 Indian military personnel, which Sri Lanka remembers with great amount of debt to us, and they have erected a war memorial in their memory in Sri Lanka. Indian Navy always is in readiness in coordination with our sister services to undertake tackle any regional contingencies. And many of them may not be known in the media, but I can tell you from my experience that we were there, standing by, so to say. We have contributed our bit to the anti-piracy and high-risk area operations. I was the fleet navigating officer in 1999 when the Indian Coast Guard and the Indian Navy intercepted Alundra Rainbow, which was a Japanese ship hijacked in the Straits of Singapore and Malacca and repainted, renamed as MV Tigarama, and was heading to the Persian Gulf when the Coast Guard and the Indian Navy intercepted this and brought the hijackers to justice in the Admiralty Court at Mumbai. From 2008, we have had the Gulf of Aden patrols. Our Operation Island Watch in the Lakshadweep area in 2011 led to capture of 120 pirates, which resulted in shifting of the high-risk piracy area well to the west from the Indian coasts. Operation Sankalp we launched in 2019 June when there were heightened tensions between Iran and United States in the aftermath of the termination of the JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, to cap the Iranian nuclear program. And we continue to maintain one ship on station today. In terms of humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, our contribution to the post-tsunami HADR, wherein we launched 32 ships and 20 aircraft, 3 operations: Operation Rainbow to Sri Lanka, of Castor to Maldives, of Gambhir to Indonesia. We were the first and the only naval forces on site for a few days till the United States Navy Naval 7th Fleet passing through the area came in to help. The Operation Neer to support water crisis in Maldives. Not only did we give them water, we also helped repair the reverse osmosis plant. The assistance to Bangladesh in 2007 is there. I mean, these are the 2 examples. Almost is every second year we help Bangladesh. 2019 March, when 3 ships of the 1st Training Squadron were en route from Mauritius to Durban in South Africa, we had the opportunity to divert them, indicating the flexibility of naval power. We diverted them from their passage to Port Beira in the northern part of Mozambique, where Cyclone Idai, the second severe-most cyclone in the South Indian Ocean region in history, hit that port. And for about 10 days, Indian ships were the only ships providing succor to the population which was cut off. And we even flew United Nations observers in our 50-year-old L08 helicopter. Cyclone Diane in Madagascar in 2020 saw Indian Navy launching off Vanilla to support them and transport food aid. Mission Sagar launched in May 20. While the world was not opening their doors to anybody, it was here, India, the trusted first responder and preferred security partner, coming to the aid of Maldives, Mauritius, Madagascar, Comoros, and Seychelles, the first tranche. And over successive missions, we covered 15 countries, traversing 40,000 nautical miles, spending 215 cumulative days at sea, delivering 3,000 tons of food aid, 300 metric tons of liquid oxygen, various and assorted medical gear. And this is apart from the Vaccine Maitri initiative by the government of India, which saw 300 million doses of COVID vaccines being delivered. We saw non-combatant evacuation operations undertaken by the Indian Navy, demonstrating our reach, our sustainability, our rapid response. In Op Sukun in Lebanon, we also evacuated foreign nationals there. Op Rahat in Yemen, once again, foreign nationals were a part of the evacuation operations. Op Blossom in Libya, Operation Kaveri this year by the Western Fleet, and one of our ships heading back, the OPV, commanded by Commander Fanindra, returning from the Mediterranean, saw transporting Indian nationals from Port Sudan to Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. And as we speak, the Minister for National Affairs has just announced Operation Ajay to evacuate our citizens from the conflict zone of Israel back home. And I have not the least doubt that some elements of the Indian Navy, the Western Fleet, or the Gulf of Aden unit would have been positioned north in the Red Sea, through the Gulf of Aqaba, into the waters of the waters of the Gulf of Aqaba to the states of Tiran into the Iliad. And you won't be surprised if you find the Indian naval units participating in this operation too. The Hash Highway is the highway of transportation of narcotics from the Makaran coast. It's a pictorial depiction, and we saw this year in May about 2,500 kilograms of methamphetamine were recovered or seized by the Indian Navy off the coast of Kerala, amounting to about 25,000 crores of value. We have close cooperation with the friendly foreign countries, particularly Maldives and Sri Lanka, to undertake operations to tackle that yellow arm of the Hash Highway. We maintain a great amount of coordination with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, Joint Interagency Task Force of the United States, Navy in both the NAVCENT as well as the PACOM at Hawaii, and our international liaison officers at the IFC IWAR are great assets in this regard. Maritime safety and search and rescue. We saw Indian Navy stepping forward with the MV Wakashio in Mauritius, New Diamond, and Express Pearl in 2020 and 21 of Sri Lanka, subsunk for Indonesian submarine Nanggala in 2001, though our DSRV had to be recalled back because of request from the host nation. We gave help in the COVID to Philippine naval ships of Kochi when they had fire on board, and of course, the legendary search and rescue operation for Commander Ablosh Tommy, who was engaged in Golden Globe race in 2018, 2,500 nautical miles away from the Indian coast, in coordination with the French, the Australian, and the National Coast Guard of Mauritius, is very well known. In order to influence the ocean health and sustenance, India has focused on sustainable development goals and climate change. We have voluntarily already exceeded the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change norms unilaterally. We have been pioneers in launching the International Solar Alliance, Global Biofuel Alliance, Lifestyle for Environment, Coalition for Disaster Resilience and Infrastructure for Resilient Island States, and Biosphere Beyond National Jurisdiction of the High Seas Treaty just this month, last month. Our maritime engagements help to reassure our neighbors and our diaspora, shape perceptions, dissuade and persuade adversaries, forge friendships. From the time I joined till to date, we have seen tremendous increase in number of port calls. On any single day, we have at least one ship undertaking OTR or OSD, or a ship en route to or from a foreign port. Last 15th August, we had one ship flying the Indian colors in every continent, projecting our soft power. Our exercises promote security. It's well known that the navies that exercise together do not fight each other. We share knowledge, enhance trust, build interoperability, and where required, even integration. From the past exercises at the lower end to intermediate level exercises to the institutional exercises at the higher end, we have Malabar, which is anchored by Cod, Varuna, Konkan, Indra, Ibismar, Jimex, Simbex, Sindex, Jimex, Nasim al Bahar, and many more at the higher end of the spectrum. Operational interactions include Milan, International Maritime Boundary Line patrols, coordinated patrols with many countries, joint EEZ surveillance with nations which have got lesser capacities, particularly the island states in the Vanilla Islands in the Southwest Indian Ocean region. We're a part of the closely interact with the contact group on combating piracy of the coast of Somalia, shared awareness and deconflicting mechanism, and of course with the recap information sharing center at Singapore. We have staff talks with about 20 countries, 11 of them littorals. These promote mutual interests and promote friendships. High-level interactions, both at the political level and the level of the Chief of Naval Staff and the ministerial level, help to enhance strategic partnerships and interactions. They provide a great amount of intensity to our engagement, and they help formulate our policies and our strategies in engagement with our friends to tackle various challenges. Our engagements in IORA IONS, BeamStech, Colombo Security Conclave, the Goa Maritime Conclave, Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, the Quad, are all aimed at promoting connectivity, communications, consultation, consensus, cohesion, camaraderie, cooperation, and coordination, and to avoid or prevent competition, contestation, confrontation, coercion, crisis, and ultimately conflict. In terms of capacity building, we have already delivered 30 ships, 1 submarine, and 14 aircraft to our friendly countries, in addition to coastal surveillance radars to many countries in the IWAR. In addition, we also undertake development of infrastructure to many countries with no strings attached, unlike some other countries who say one thing and do quite the another. We have seen this example in Hambantota, Tota, and we have seen the financial crisis of Sri Lanka. In terms of capability enhancement, training is our forte. Over 1,000 high-tech vacancies. We have trained thousands of foreign naval personnel. Our FOST undertakes workups of various foreign ships. In addition, our mobile training teams and personnel posted to foreign academies contribute. We provide technical supports in terms of refits, repairs, and maintenance. We support. We have provided support teams to Mauritius, Seychelles, and Maldives, and aviation support to those three countries. And in addition to Sri Lanka, we have seen in Maldives some voices coming out that our military personnel will be kicked out from there. Let me assure you, the Indian Navy and Indian Naval Forces are not there for our own interests. We are there to help our brotherly countries because they don't have the capacities. Our hydrographic cooperation has helped Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Mauritius, and the listed countries in production of charts and laying their claims in terms of the UNCLOS provisions. We also provide in recent times weather warnings on the IONS website and closely interact with stations in countries who have got cyclone warnings in force. Our collaborative efforts, I have listed some of them already. The IPOI, and these are all listed. They are all contributing towards enhancing security and, by extension, development. The last one, the IPMDA, and the last but one, the IFC IWAR, which are very key structures. The Goa Maritime Conclave will be held this month or the next month, and it is a mind-boggling array of collaborative efforts that the Indian Navy indulges in. In terms of regional maritime constructs, we have again an array of arrangements. The Africa-Asia or Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, steered by India and Japan in coordination as an alternative to the Belt and Road Initiative. The Indian Ocean Commission, the Djibouti Code of Conduct, which is augmented by the Jeddah Amendment, the I2U2 in the northwest region of the Indian Ocean, that is the India, Israel, and UAE, USA, the ASEAN Regional Forum. This is again the Look East and Act East initiative. The East Asia Summit, the ADMM, that's ASEAN Defense Ministerial Meet Plus, where we are the observer. The Shangri-La Dialogue, the Western Pacific Naval Symposium, and the recently announced IMEC, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, which was talked about this morning. In conclusion, I would say that no other country in the world has as much at stake as India in the security and development in the Indian Ocean region and the very health of the Indian Ocean, because it affects monsoons, it affects our economy and our very survival, and of course the great amount of grief that can come because of global warming to our own coasts and island territories. We pursue an inclusive and human-centric. This is very key, the human-centric, because many countries which undertake infrastructure developments in the region are not human-centric. They are looking at money. Where is the moolah? We look at the human development. We are transparent in approach. We respect laws. We do not tread on anybody's sovereignty. Like, for example, the CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, very shamelessly, with no regard to sovereignty, is traversing to the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, which is a part of the India. So we maintain territorial integrity. We do not covet somebody else's islands as is happening in the South China Sea. And we do this all in the spirit of Sagar, as Prime Minister Modi has enunciated. India, as I mentioned to you, has been the first responder to any crisis brewing in the Indian Ocean region. And we are on the front foot, straining at the leash, even when a crisis is actually developing. Though it may not be in the news, we are there above the horizon. And we have emerged as the preferred security partner, a partner of choice, whom the region trusts. We aspire to be a Vishwa Mitra, and it is in keeping with our ethos of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. India's conduct positively, not negatively, impacts security and development, and therefore there are no plowbacks or pushbacks from any country in the region. The bulk of the population, some political leadership which has been bought over by more powerful purses, and this is the fashion these days to buy off political leaders and arm twist them or blackmail them into doing your own bidding. India doesn't indulge in this. India's success in the sustainable development goals and achievement of our goals during the Amrit Kal will have a resonating and ripple effects influence in the Indian Ocean region. And this is a positive. I have finished and I'll be open for any questions. Thank you very much, sir.
The house is now open for questions.
Good evening, sir. I am Cadet Anushka Yadav of the Daredevil Squad. My questions are for Dr. Sanjeev Sanyal. The first question is, how do you foresee the increasing presence and intervention of Chinese in the Indo-Pacific region affecting the potential growth and development of regional economy? Sir, the second question is, will the India-Middle East-Europe economic corridor still be beneficial after the countries in the Arabian Peninsula run out of oil, as you said that the world is moving towards renewable sources of energy?
The Chinese away. They are a very important part of the global economy. We trade with them, we export to them, but we import from them as well. In fact, we import more from them than we export to them. Sure, that creates a certain level of dependency, but the fact of the matter is they are the source of inputs for many of our own industries. And as I said, while we have to be wary of them, we also need to be clear that we need to trade with them, to cooperate, and there will be areas where we should be willing to cooperate with them where it serves our interests, rather than get tied into a rigid worldview where we don't pursue our interests because at every step we try to avoid the Chinese. We can't do that. We cannot cut the nose to spite the face. So since we cannot wish them away, I think they need to be managed. And in areas where our interests coincide, we should collaborate with them. And where our interest does not coincide with them, at the same time, we should be willing to simply walk out. And we have done that. So if you see, for example, there was a lot of pressure to enter into RCEP, which is a trade arrangement, where China will play a major role. We, at the risk of some criticism, we decided to keep out of the RCEP arrangement. That doesn't mean that we have become inward looking and so on. Many people blamed us on that. That's not the case. We are quite happy to sign free trade agreements with the UAE, with Australia, with Japan. We are now negotiating one with the United Kingdom. So the fact that we kept out of RCEP suggests simply that this particular deal did not work to our interests. But we will sign on to the ones that do. At the same time, there are areas where we may be, like under the BRICS umbrella, for example, be willing to work with the Chinese on other issues. So maintaining our flexibility, and very importantly, being clear about where and when our interests are being served is a far better way for us to deal with this rather fluid geopolitical environment. Well, there are many benefits from it. First of all, do remember what the problem the Arabians have. Their problem basically is that they need to think about their place in the world after not oil running out so much as the world requiring less oil as we move out to renewables and other sources of energy. They recognize that their place in the world will suddenly dissolve. And so they are making their arrangements. And look, they see India as an important part of their future. So rather than try and ignore them because of some rigid views we have that the Middle East is somehow a dangerous place or a place that somehow you will always back Pakistan or some such preconceived notion which locks us into thinking of the world in a particular way. We have instead said, look, we understand you have a future you want to think about. We understand that India can easily be a part of that future and of course, it benefits both sides. They insert themselves into the global supply chain in terms of the transport arrangements. They create an alternative to the Suez Canal, which is always a dangerous choking point. And they create a certain relevance to the world for themselves. And of course, we get a transport link through to the Western Hemisphere, at least to Europe and North Africa. So that, it's a win-win. And, that's how I think that we need to think about it. Instead of the older, more rigid way of thinking merely of the Middle East as some sort of an impediment to trade, and hence we now engage with them.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening to all the speakers. I am Correct Shankar of the select term, and my question is to Vice Admiral M.S. Pawar. Sir, Indonesia, Australia, and other extra-regional forces are all contesting with China for influence in the Indian Ocean region. Sir, how does India's overall strategy address these challenges?
No, it's a given. Wherever the nations have their interests, their ships would go. And as far as Indonesia and Australia are concerned, they are our friends. We saw Dr. Sanjeev Sanyal saying things about Indonesian polity, their currency being rupiah and their national symbol being Garud. Their airline is called Garuda. And we have had historical linkages. We, as I mentioned to you, they are a part of our security constructs. Indonesia, we do coordinated patrols. We have multiple level of interactions. They are a part of the Milan series of exercises, and we saw Milan 2022. Australia, of course, is a member of the Malabar and linchpin of the Quad engagements. Our views, our interests in enhancing the security of the Indo-Pacific are more and more aligned. In fact, there's the biggest alignment amongst the Quad countries. And Indonesia, actually, considering the fact that they have got the critical waterways of the Sunda, Lombok, and very close to them to the north, Malacca and Singapore, as well as the only straits which have adequate depths to provide submerged passage for nuclear submarines, the Omba and Wetar Straits. They are very, very closely associated with the various structures for maintaining security and development, and they align very much with the Indian Navy's maritime security strategy, because there is no reason why we have any conflicts with Indonesia or Australia. So they fit in our neighborhood first, and they are actually our neighbors. We share a boundary with Indonesia. They're friendly neighbors, notwithstanding the small little distraction which happened in 1965 war, when because of geopolitical reasons and religious card, Indonesia leaned a little bit towards Pakistan. But then they have realized that, and Indonesia is one of the one of the friendliest countries to us, and so also Australia. After Canada, we see a large amount of Indian immigration going to democratic Australia, and Australia and Indonesia is a moderate Islamic country. I've been there a couple of times. The remnants of our ancient links and civilization continue to be there. So both Australia and Indonesia fit in very well in our maritime security strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening to all speakers. I am Midshipman Omkar Boji of the 8th term, and my question is to the INA Syndicate. The talk made it evident that there are immense resources in Antarctica. However, nations such as Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa, which are in proximity, are not exploiting them. What, according to you, could be the reason for this?
I'm really glad that our presentation gave our fellow midshipmen food for thought, because this was the first question that came into our minds when we were studying about resources in Antarctica. Well, the answer to this is quite simple. All these countries which you stated are a signatory of the Antarctic Treaty of 1959, due to which the mining and drilling in these regions is prohibited. Furthermore, the environmental conditions of these areas is very harsh. So the amount of money they have to spend into drilling in these areas is much more. So they simply import oil from other countries. But this being said, the question is, are these countries not planning to drill? We as a syndicate don't think so. Because the presence of scientific research bases in these areas, these bases have been studying the subsurface of Antarctica for years. And countries like USA and Russia have spent millions of dollars into studying the coastline of these areas and finding oil. And the public discovery of oil made by Russia is a bold statement into showing that how these countries are prepared for a day when mining and drilling in Antarctica will be a reality. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, is there any other question? Okay, we will make that the last question.
Good evening to all speakers. I'm Cadet Saloni Singh of Daredevil's Corps. My question is to the INA Syndicate. The entire planet is progressing towards clean and green energy. Sir, would it still be prudent to invest heavily in the polar regions, which are primarily rich in fossil fuels?
So, very interesting question indeed. First, we'll have to look at the applications of fossil fuel. Mainly, fossil fuels are used for many things, but main applications are in terms of we producing electricity from it and we using it as a fuel for our transportation. Currently, 15% of world's electricity is generated using renewable resources. I'm not saying that the future of the world will be clean and renewable, but right now, for us, it seems to be a very distant future. Why I say so is because what we can achieve with fossil fuels is a clean supply chain demand. We can burn amount of fossil fuel and we can fulfill our demands. But with renewable sources, we can only fulfill demand which we have built, like the capacity of the plants which we are having. Secondly, all the hydroelectric power plants and the solar power plants, wind farms, they are built in regions where we can have maximum output from the natural resources. Transporting this generated electricity to the population hubs, that requires a lot of infrastructure. And that is a region where we are still lagging. Thirdly, the economic viability. Still, with all the existing infrastructure which we have for the fossil fuels, generating 1 unit of electricity cost is much more higher than a renewable resource if we include everything from beginning till the end product at the consumer's house. Now, if we come to the aspect of a fuel which is used in fossil fuels which are used in transportation, they are unable to build that much amount of thrust which can power the cargo ships or commercial planes. Hence, they are not having any use. We are not seeing any renewable resources being used in these aspects. So, what I believe that mining and drilling in Antarctic is a very important thing which we should focus on, and it will be a future. It will turn into a reality once the Antarctic Treaty is reviewed in 2014. I think that answers your question.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you all panelists for taking the questions. Uh, we've had a fascinating session this afternoon, which has extended a little bit, and so I will try to be very brief. Uh, Initially, of course, we had Dr. Sanjeev Sanyal talk to us about the blue economy. Of course, he gave some historical linkages and examples. He highlighted the rise and decline of nations linked with their maritime power. And he stressed that geopolitics is not new. And, Song and Ming dynasties, the examples that he gave. And for India, he stressed that there should be no rigidity in policies, that the policies should be flexible, and that India should continue to focus on its interests and develop partnerships as it is doing at present. I just wanted to add a few points to what Mr. Sanal said. One is, of course, he gave the example of Cholas. And, one thing that struck me at that time was that Cholas had a very large navy. From some accounts that we read, Cholas had a navy of over 1 million people, which is much bigger than the present day Navy, Indian Navy. And of course, while he focused a lot on the Cholas and the earlier the Kalinga dynasties and the happenings in that arena, I think in the morning, as it was also brought out, that similar thing happened even earlier when the residents of Maluha, that is the Indus Valley civilization, had strong trading links with Magan, that is in Oman, and with Dilmun, that is in Bahrain. But specific to geoeconomics and CPAR, it may not be inappropriate to quote once again Mahan. And Mahan said that aptitude for commercial pursuits must be a distinguishing feature of nations that have, at one time or another, been great upon the sea. Now, therefore, this talk about blue economy, few important factors that we need to keep in mind that while there is a lot of potential, currently the blue economy is about 5% of the global GDP. There is no globally accepted definition of blue economy. And very recently, during India's presidency of G20, some principles on blue economy were agreed upon. These will be very useful as we go forward to develop common understanding on blue economy. And as I mentioned in the morning, we are expecting India's blue economy final policy to be issued very soon. While the percentage of blue economy will vary from country to country, for India, it may be some percentage, but for some island countries, almost 90% of their economy is blue economy. We must keep that in mind. There was a question to Dr. Sanyal on IMEC, on the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, which currently has come under a bit of a shadow because of the developments that are taking place right now due to the Israel-Hamas war. And so whenever these projects pass through geopolitically sensitive or areas, there was expectation of normalization because of I2U2, because of Abraham Accords, because of what was happening and the process of normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel. There was an expectation that these geopolitical concerns were slightly low, but they have emerged. You may recall that once upon many years ago, there was a proposal which never was announced, but there was a proposal for Turkmenistan, Iran, Pakistan India gas pipeline was a proposal, but it was not taken forward simply because of the geopolitical risks. So geopolitical risks for these corridors will weigh in off and on, and we will have to adapt for these geopolitical challenges that emerge. The syndicate, INS syndicate, made a very elaborate, very good presentation, very enjoyable presentation, and they highlighted the importance, the salience of the polar areas, and they posed. The good part was that they posed certain questions in their presentation to themselves. It is always good to pose certain questions and try and answer them. And in the end, they outlined some common opportunities for both the Arctic and Antarctic for India, and specific for Arctic and Antarctic, what sort of opportunities exist. And they made certain recommendations. These recommendations, of course, some of them would need to be analyzed in greater detail. Why I say that is because at present, to have those recommendations, to have a very strong military component may be difficult at present to progress, given the current focus on treating them as shared spaces and more for developmental purpose and not for military purposes. And therefore, proposals related to having military bases there, etc. at present, particularly when India is neither an Arctic state typically or an Antarctic state from the point of view of sovereignty claims, may be a little bit more challenging at present. From the point of view of Arctic, here it is important to keep in mind that the current scenario of what is happening in Arctic and Antarctica is different. Currently, there is more focus on the Arctic. The reason is simple, because the Arctic ice is melting. In Antarctic, the ice is really from 1980s. If the satellite imagery is to be counted upon, there is very little ice loss in the Antarctic, but there is substantial ice loss in the Arctic. And in the Arctic, various models suggest that between 2036 to 2067, the Arctic will have near meltdown or near complete meltdown in the month of September of each year. And which means that the opening up of Arctic for various passages that were referred to is now a given. And because of that, a number of other things have opened up, because then that opens up trade and connectivity, and therefore it opens up issues related to geopolitics and geoeconomics. You mentioned in your presentation about Arctic Council having 8 Arctic nations, but please keep in mind that along with 8 Arctic nations, there are also 6 indigenous populations which are also part of the Arctic Council. Another important development in the Arctic that we need to keep in mind is that while it is Arctic, it is known as Arctic 8, but it is increasingly being referred to as Arctic 7 since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war. Russia came up with its own revised Arctic policy in February 2022, but the other countries are now sort of isolating Russia as far as the Arctic is concerned, and therefore it is increasingly being referred to as Arctic 7. You did not bring out the China's Polar Silk Road project. While you mentioned about the Northwest Passage, the Northeast Passage, and the Northern Silk Route, it is important to bear in mind that China has sanctioned $3 billion for investment in the Northern Sea route, which is at present taking priority over the other 2 routes. And China has already has 2 icebreakers. You talked about India's project for the polar research vessel. India actually in 2012-13, somewhere there, we had announced for a polar research vessel. That plan did not go through for whatever reasons. And about 2-3 months back, another announcement has been made sanctioning 2,600 crores for another polar research vessel, which will take 5 years or so. The another important part is that there is an Arctic Circle Forum, and I think it is And Arctic Circle Forum hosts the conversations on Arctic Circle issues. India has never hosted Arctic Circle Forum in India. It is not necessary to be an Arctic Council member to host that. And I would, through this webinar, make that suggestion that India should position itself to hold an Arctic Circle Forum in India in the coming few years. As far as Antarctic is concerned, there are about 70 research stations total. And India has 2 right now, as you rightly mentioned. And we have done about 40 expeditions now. And there is a case for increasing the research activity. You yourself brought out in terms of scientific, in percentage terms, it's very low. And there the concerns are related more to depletion of ozone layer than to melting of ice. And geopolitically, the challenges are more as far as Arctic is concerned. On resource management, management of resources, the key challenge is the governance of management of resources. And there are different frameworks. IORA is one, IOC, Indian Ocean Commission is one, UNESCO is one. For fisheries, FAO compliance agreement is one. There are Indian Ocean Tuna Commission, Indo-Pacific Tuna Development and Management Program. In the Pacific, there is 2050 Blue Pacific Continent, and so on and so forth. But working through these frameworks, for India, it is important to work through these frameworks rather than work independently as far as resource management in these areas or in deep sea areas is concerned. When I say deep sea area, it is deep sea mining, which may not necessarily be in the polar regions, but is in areas close to it, as is the case in Southwest Indian Ocean, where we have some exploration contracts, also in the Southwest Pacific. The Admiral Pawar covered security and development in quite some detail, and India's approach towards it. He highlighted, various issues related to capacity building, new threats in the Indian Ocean, both traditional and non-traditional threats, foreign naval bases, nuclearization. Highlighted the importance also of critical maritime infrastructure, which has become very important now, the trade-related issues. But I would only add that through Sagar and then subsequently through IPOI, membership of Quad, I2U2, etc., India has essentially put forward a concept of what may be called as development-linked cooperative security. And so cooperative security, which is based on common interests of development, that is what Sagar is all about. And in 2019, India had also linked IPOI with Sagar, and India has been highlighting this linkage very strongly through its various mechanisms that it has been following. So, in addition to, as far as influence in the Indian Ocean region is concerned, influence is not a constant. It is not that influence is always at a particular level, or it is always rising or declining. Influence is also something which is very dynamic, but in India's influence in the Indian Ocean region and in the wider Indo-Pacific region has gained traction, has gained more acceptance because of India's approach, as Admiral Pawar highlighted. And it was quite evident at the G20 summit that was held under the Indian presidency very recently. And while talking about these frameworks, let me also mention that the Indian Ocean IORA conference that Admiral Pawar mentioned, which day before yesterday at Colombo, where Sri Lanka has taken over as the chair for IORA for the period 23 to 25. India is the vice chair, and India had taken major steps, major efforts to have IORA come up with this Indo-Pacific outlook, which was announced during the presidency of Bangladesh. So overall, the acceptance of India, particularly particularly as a bridge between the global north and global south, has gained a lot of acceptance. And India's approach, whether at G20, whether it is through digital public infrastructure or public goods or women-led empowerment or inclusion of Africa, all of them have had a strong resonance, particularly in the global south, as also India's linkages with global north. So our ability to promote security, stability, prosperity, rules-based international order, etc. All these issues, while at the same time keeping our national interests in mind, is something that has been acknowledged and appreciated around the world. So I think we've had some very interesting discussions. In particular, while I thank all of them, all the participants, and I would like to second what Admiral Pawar mentioned, that the INA syndicate made a very fine presentation, and from a young team for a presentation of this standard is certainly worth complimenting. So finally, let me thank INA, all the staff at INA, and all cadets and midshipmen. I'm sure they would have benefited for this afternoon session. And with that, also thanking all the panelists for this seminar, for this webinar. Let me bring this session to a close and back to INA control team.
Sir, I also take the opportunity to thank you as the chair and all the panelists for wonderful presentations today. And thank you very much, sir. All of us, please join me in conveying our appreciation in the standard manner.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Sir, you are requested to kindly sign off at convenience. Thank you very much.
And with that, we have concluded